have Joel from GC3 coming on first to introduce.
No, that would be Marvin. That would be me, David.
Oh, David Levine,
okay.
ASBC. Go ahead.
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for your patience in getting started today. On behalf of the American Sustainable Business Council, the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council, and Trucost, we are thrilled to have you join us for this webinar today on the new report that ASBC and GC3 commissioned from Trucost, making the business and economic case for safer chemistry. Just to those that are not familiar, the American Sustainable Business Council is a growing coalition of business organizations and companies committed to advancing market solutions and policies that support a sustainable economy. Our work is to inform and engage business leaders while educating decision makers and the media about the opportunities and policies that can lead to a more sustainable economy. Founded in 2009, today we represent over 250,000 companies across sectors, across geographies, all of which are working together to grow jobs, grow business, and to build a sustainable economy. And we're working on a range of issues from safer chemicals to climate change, trade, sustainable agriculture, clean water, access to capital, among others. So for us, it was a real privilege to partner with GC3 on this, and our joint goal was to commission a report that would present the economic case for safer chemicals in order to advance the move towards safer chemicals, towards chemical industry reform, to strengthen and expand the opportunities for businesses to change over their business practices, for them to also then be able to step up and work with us to help support the change in the market, the larger set of changes that were needed to also advance policy so that we can move from safer chemicals to move to safer chemicals from more hazardous chemicals. The question for us was, could we back it up with strong economic data? So that was the call to reach out to Trucost, which was to say, can you confirm that we're actually moving in the right direction, that we're making the right arguments here, that there really is business and economic data to back up what we've been advocating for in many different forms. And so it was from our vantage point that we were really pleased to have this report come together and to see that it was finding significant market opportunities for safer, less toxic chemicals. So with that said, again, really appreciative of the opportunity to work with GC3, and at this moment I'd like to turn it over to Joel Tickner, the director of GC3, to offer some welcoming remarks as well.
Great. Thank you so much, David. My name is Joel Tickner. I am the co-director of the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council. The GC3 is a business-to-business network consisting of over 75 companies across sectors and levels of supply chain collaborating to accelerate the research and development and adoption of green chemistry solutions. The GC3 focuses across sectors and through collaboration so that learning by what other sectors have done or what other levels of supply chains have done to address barriers and challenges to green chemistry and to overcome those barriers and challenges is how we work within a series of projects, collaborative projects, to identify leverage points and opportunities to find solutions to challenges affecting green chemistry. So this report, in collaboration with ASBC and Trucost, is one of a series of reports that the GC3 is undertaking as it builds what we're calling an agenda for mainstreaming green chemistry, so that we can sort of look at that ecosystem of green chemistry and understand how do we know, or how do we get to a point where all chemistry is by default green chemistry, and what are the changes that have to happen in education, the marketplace, in research and development, in public policy that would support this transition to green chemistry. So this report is one part of that. We have another report we're about to launch that looks at the barriers to accelerating demand and supply of green chemistry solutions, and one looking at how do we measure whether we're progressing in the right direction. And then lastly, later this summer, the GC3 will be presenting its agenda for mainstreaming green chemistry, what members of the GC3 feel are the necessary steps if we're serious about going from green chemistry being a niche consideration to being the underlying consideration when we design, develop, and adopt chemistry. So always it's been a challenge of how do we make the business and economic case both internally in a firm or in a government agency and externally to the outside environment. And it's not just a matter of having the key economic data, but what are the stories that we can tell? What are the pieces of that puzzle that make a very clear and compelling case for green chemistry and safer chemistry to flourish and to thrive in an emerging economy? So with that, we're very excited about this report. We think that it has some really important lessons of the types of work we should be doing in the future to move towards mainstreaming green chemistry. So David, with that, if you could introduce our presenters.
Excellent. So again, as we've mentioned, we had commissioned with Trucost, and we chose Trucost because we believe that they really had the important skill sets and experience in this. So since 2000, Trucost has provided data-driven insights to help businesses and investors understand the economic case for investing in more sustainable business models. So they had that kind of experience that we were looking for. And we also chose Trucost because of their work. It spanned a range of industry sectors, supply chains, and it really worked with a broad section of the types of players that we were looking to hear from, across supply chains, from downstream to upstream. And they also had familiarity with the tools and data sets that we believed were needed to be able to get to the kind of quality report. And then finally, it's because we value them as an important third party, that could bring the credibility, in addition to the work of ASBC and GC3. So with that, we want to turn it now over to the two primary cohorts we had here with, in the form of Libby Bernick, the Senior Vice President of North America from Trucost, and Steve Bolton, the Project Manager.
Very good. Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Joel. And my name is Libby Bernick, and I manage Trucost's North American Business Unit, and we'll be sharing some of the research highlights with you today. I'm joined here by my colleague, Steve Bolton, who led the Trucost team in conducting the research. And before we get into some of the findings and details about the work, I do want to commend GC3 and ASBC for their leadership in applying this type of business lens, this economic analysis, to help organizations and communities understand the business and economic risks and opportunities related to safer chemistry. We do think that it was an important study and are honored to work with these two organizations and to be able to do the research. And if you go on to the next slide, we've got the topics that we'll cover today listed here. There's really just three things we want to focus on. We'll be providing just a very brief highlights of the scope of the research, and then Steve will dive in and provide some great insights and details on some of the key findings around our research themes, and then we'll highlight and review some of the recommendations. We don't have time here to go into full details of the entire report, but we do encourage you and hope that will entice you to look at the full report, which is available on ASBC and GC3's website as well as Trucost. So if you go on to the next slide, I want to talk briefly about the scope of the research. And as you can imagine, this topic of safer chemistry is quite broad. And we all knew as a team going into this work that we'd have to focus the engagement. And what we did through conversation and collaboration with ASBC and GC3 is that we selected 8 research themes that would provide the basis for our work. And these themes are shown here, very focused on business and economic risk and opportunity. And the rationale, in part, for selecting these themes was that we felt that we were more likely to have data that could be reviewed, and also that these kinds of risks and opportunities would be those that are most meaningful to business and organizations trying to understand the case for safer chemistry. So we have 4 themes related to business and economic opportunity, which include the growth in safer chemistry markets, things like the direction of capital flow towards safer chemistry business models, market demand that's evidenced through buyers' policies or indications by the market that safer chemistry is in demand, and the final item is related to job growth trends that we could find related to safer chemistry. On the risk side of the equation, we focused on 4 themes that are shown here, and in particular the trend over time in number of shareholder or NGO proxies or activist campaigns, the kinds of chemical restrictions that regulators are placing on businesses. We also looked at business value at risk related to fines, and also looked at that from the standpoint of the cost to society of accidents or incidents related to conventional chemistry that then need to be mitigated. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just point out a few other aspects around our research focus. And one that's important to note early on is that we did try and focus on the U.S. economic and business issues, but we do recognize, of course, that most value chains today are global in nature. So we do recognize that some of these issues transcend geographic boundaries, but our focus was on the U.S. And we also knew early on that we needed to provide a little bit of clarity and research focus on actually what we meant by safer chemistry. And for the purposes of this report, we tried to focus on examples and insights and data, studies that really were focused on the use and generation of hazardous substances, reducing human health and environmental impacts and creating safer products. And I'll note that because for the most part this was a study where we were looking at metadata, there's some instances in the literature that address sustainable chemistry or greener chemistry. So if you look at the report, you'll note that there are some broader studies that look at these other topics, but for the most part, we really tried to keep our focus as narrowly defined as possible on this topic of safer chemistry. And one final note before I get into some of the key findings is that the scope of work included interviews with 17 different experts who are engaged in safer chemistry within their business. And this included experts from the apparel industry, retail, personal care, as well as basic chemistry. And we did try to take a value chain focus where we were looking at information at all stages within the life cycle and material value chain. So enough on the scope of the research, and we'll turn now to the next slide where we've highlighted some of our key findings that we want to also then discuss in more detail. And so if you go on there to the next slide, please. If I had to sum up the results of the research into one statement that we could carry forward, it would be this, that safer chemistry's potential for creating business and economic value is promising and poised for takeoff. And the reason that we're able to make that very strong conclusion and statement is that market growth, capital flows, and market demand for safer chemistry all show upward trajectories the past 5 years. We're seeing sales of broadly defined safer chemistry for both large corporations like Sigma-Aldrich, Dow, and DuPont, and also smaller companies like Seventh Generation and Method. We also found that businesses are making significant increases in their investment in safer chemistry R&D, and buyers, large buyers like Walmart or Kaiser Permanente in the healthcare value chain, are sending market signals through their sustainable purchasing policies that they are interested in buying materials and products made with safer chemistry. The other aspect related to business and economic value is risk. And we found a number of very clear examples where there are sizable business risks that safer chemistry could alleviate. We found, especially at a state level, that regulatory risk and steady NGO and stakeholder activism and regulatory actions related to chemical management are putting significant business value at risk through fines or loss of access to major markets. I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Steve, and he's going to share with you the details and more examples of these key findings. Steve?
Thank you, Libby. If we could forward to the next slide, please. As Libby said, those were some of the overall key findings, and I wanted to present some more detailed information in some of the research themes that we reviewed in order to give a little more context to that information. So starting here with two themes that are around the opportunities for safer chemistry and the growth in that market, as well as then we'll look at 3 slides that present information about the potential business and economic risk of conventional chemistry, and how those can be eliminated or possibly reduced through the use of safer chemistry. So first, market growth as one of the examples of opportunities for safer chemistry. We found increasing growth in the market size for safer chemistry relative to conventional chemistry across a range of markets. Also looking at it from the perspective of small companies and large companies being interested in this effort, and chemical companies themselves. Some examples presented here: building materials. In the course of time between 2009 and 2030, there's a projected increase in the safer chemistry market of over 2,000% for materials that satisfy those requirements, whereas the conventional marketplace, conventional building materials, is expected to grow significantly, but relatively much smaller at 176% during the same time period. Chemistry itself, so these are the building blocks of other products, looking at more the chemical, up the chemical value chain to the chemical producers. Safer chemistry market is expected to grow over 3,200% in the time period of now through 2020, whereas conventional chemistry is expected to only grow 133%. Personal care, also expected to grow in the short term, and this is going through next year, the projection. Safer chemistry marketplace is projected to grow about 10%. This is compound annual growth rate versus the conventional market of just over 4%. I will point out that the data is a little different here. This is U.S. data for the safer chemistry market, and unfortunately, only global data was available for the conventional marketplace. These last two categories, personal care and cleaning products, really start to show how a consumer is thinking directly about things that either touch their body or breathing environment, similar for building materials, and how those are very important to the end user and how that can help leverage the marketplace. Again, cleaning products expected to grow through the period of 2007 to 2011. We saw a growth rate of actually 20% in the safer chemistry market versus the conventional market of just over 1% compounded growth. Dow is presented here as a quick case study showing that while they define sustainable chemistry slightly differently than maybe the definition we were using, they have shown that there's a large growth rate in their product sales for products that are connected to their definition of sustainable chemistry. They started out with small sales of about 2% in 2007 and quickly met their goal of achieving 10% sales of those products by 2013, ahead of schedule for them. So again, some examples here of that we found around market growth for safer chemistry. If we could move to the next slide, please. Another example, as Libby mentioned, of the themes where the opportunities of safer chemistry are showing up are trends in capital flow. And what we found is that there is increasing moves by industry to invest R&D budgets, to invest research and research grants and other funds into looking into greener chemistry options, safer chemistry options. For example, this is taken, the first line here is taken actually from Trucost research. We found that 57% of chemical companies in the MSCI World Index of funds, has invested in green chemistry during the year 2013. So this, along with the quote that you see there on the side from a survey by the American Chemistry Society, finds that significantly there's interest by chemical companies in moving towards safer chemistry. Similarly, they found that over half of their members are interested in green chemistry, or safe, or it could also be considered safer chemistry in this range. And then finally, there at the bottom of the page, this is some data from the U.S. Patent and Trade Office showing that there is increasing growth in the capacity of companies to provide safer chemistry products based on the number of patents issued for, in their terms, sustainable chemistry over the past 15 years. As you see, significant growth recently. And so this continues to show how the marketplace is expanding its capital towards safer chemistry offerings. We can move to the next slide, please. Now these last several slides are around the risk of conventional chemistry, and these are opportunities for how safer chemistry can aid those business risks and economic risks that conventional chemistry holds. And the marketplace is starting to move towards safer chemistry. This first theme is around shareholder and NGO activism. As Libby mentioned, this is where external parties are starting to push companies towards either considering or fully moving towards safer chemistry. And I think a couple of things to point out here that are very important is, one thing, looking at the time scale. Both the table and chart show that this has been a concern for multiple years, continues to grow in significance, and it's not one or two sectors, but multiple industries where the pressure is being felt. The first line, personal care and cosmetics, there's been a lot of activity by NGOs around changing cosmetics to have safer chemistry, pushing companies to consider that concern. For example, over 300 companies in the period of around 2010 pledged to avoid specific chemistries in their products and also disclose ingredients based on the pressure from the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics. On the healthcare front, an example is the leverage purchasing that is moving towards products with safer chemistry. As you can understand, being in a healthcare environment, air quality, breathing space, and exposure concerns are extremely important. So a lot of companies, including Kaiser Permanente, are moving towards preferred purchasing. Example here, Practice Green Health has leveraged its over $135 billion in purchasing towards safer chemistry requirements and disclosure by suppliers. On the retail side, an older statistic, but showing the importance of, again, the time scale and how this has continued to be an important issue for industry, is around 2005, 17 investor groups representing over $22 billion in assets looked to companies to provide and disclose the risks that those investments and their use of toxic chemicals may have for the value of those companies. And finally on this chart, the flame retardants, which is obviously more of a class of chemistry and it can affect multiple sectors. There's been an effort to get the Consumer Product Safety Commission to begin banning products with toxic flame retardants. Obviously, a lot of companies and retailers are pushing to remove those products in chemistry, but also at the same time, these groups are trying to force the federal government to take action. Another item is the shareholder proxies that have appeared around hazardous chemistry. And as you can see, this has been a concerted effort as well. I will point out that not only have these resolutions appeared, but in certain circumstances, there have been a majority of shareholders who've actually voted for them. So it's not necessarily that only that the resolution appears, but it's showing an increasing concern by companies and by shareholders for those companies, even conventional shareholders, that are starting to understand the risks of toxic materials. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Presenting business value at risk. This, we found examples that range from market share concerns and shareholder value all the way to lawsuits and fines. And wanted to point out a few items here. In fiscal year 2014 for the federal government, it levied almost $10 billion in private industry cleanup requirements, as well as equipment to those companies, along with over $160 million in fines. So these are requirements that the federal government is making of companies to who have displayed problematic management of hazardous chemistry. An example from the commercial side is that Johnson & Johnson experienced concerns by consumers during the period of 2008 to 2010, where they saw over 8% loss in market share. And this is a significant cost they incurred, loss of market, but as a result, they had to quickly move to eliminate certain chemistries from their products, reformulate, and I think one of the things we bring up in the report is that it's often more valuable and to make those decisions on your own as a company and be proactive in making those replacements of ingredients of concern instead of reactive. In this case, because Johnson & Johnson was facing pressure, they had to quickly move to replace certain chemicals and at a much higher cost directly to them than could have been done in a more proactive effort. And on the right, we'll see that fines have been levied against some of the major retailers in the United States around mishandling hazardous products. And this can range from product mismanagement on the store shelves, in movement in and out of warehouses, etc., distribution centers. But what's important to note is the significant fines that have added up across multiple incursions. Walmart being the highest there with over $80 million in fines in 2013. And keeping that in mind, if we can move to the next slide, what we can see is these finds have become impetus for the largest retailers in the U.S. to develop chemical management policies and try to eliminate hazardous chemistry wherever possible. Walmart, Target, and Staples, representing anywhere from $23 billion to over $400 billion in purchasing power, have now developed documented interest in using safer chemistry and purchasing safer chemistry from suppliers, and are starting to push that pressure through the value chain. Those are my thoughts. I think we'll be going back to Libby now. Thanks.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Steve. And I'll just spend a few minutes going over some of the report's recommendations before we turn it back to Joel and David for Q&A. So the first recommendation coming out of the report really spoke clearly to us that if you are a business operating in a sector where there's excuse me, opportunities to incorporate safer chemistry, that we do recommend that you assess the business case for your particular market segment. And given the revenue growth opportunities that we saw, whether it's for large or small businesses, as well as the potential for significant regulatory fines or loss of access to markets, it's clearly something that organizations should consider doing now if they have not done so already. There's also a number of recommendations in the report related to the way that the value chain tracks and communicates about safer chemistry, and those are listed here and described in more detail in the report, but one of those recommendations is related to metrics that are used to track information about business and economic value of safer chemistry. One of the things that came out of our interviews was that state regulations and activist campaigns can be very powerful motivators for action within the business community, and yet there didn't seem to be one place where people could go to find that information. So there was a recommendation that that information could be tracked and provided to the business community. Similarly, we also found that there was, at one point, the government was tracking statistics on job growth related to green and safer chemistry. That information is no longer tracked, but it was felt that this kind of information would be very powerful for communities and economies who are looking to make the business or economic case for safer chemistry within their region. The other recommendation related to this notion of communicating about safer chemistry has to do with providing an accounting for the societal benefits associated with the total addressable market for safer chemistry. And the reason why this is important is something that Steve alluded to, is that what we found is that many examples seem to be situational, one-off, or reactive in response to some government or NGO instance. And in order to have a move towards a more transformational or proactive economy and business model based on safer chemistry, we believe that having this kind of full accounting of the societal costs and environmental impacts of conventional chemistry at industry-wide scale would provide a stronger basis for those policy-related mechanisms, and would also be much more likely to attract capital from large impact investors who are looking to direct flow towards more sustainable business models. And businesses that are addressing large societal problems are also likely to get more recognition and more traction. The other aspect related to communications that I wanted to briefly highlight was this notion that Steve also mentioned, that safer chemistry takes place across a value chain, and that we felt that it was very important to have, for all those stakeholders, a common understanding of specific aspects of safer chemistry that they're working on. For example, the principles of green chemistry, there's 12 of them. Many of you in the audience are very familiar with them. They're very well defined, and they're also very broad and all-encompassing. And as a result, organizations may be using the term safer chemistry or green chemistry to mean different things, and as a result, it can be hard for the value chain to work together towards a common objective. So we recommend that where possible that stakeholders work towards having a common understanding of the different aspects of safer chemistry that they are addressing. And as a final point on a related matter, one of the things that we heard through the interview process was that people who are involved in businesses who work on safer chemistry often have challenges communicating the value and the benefits of safer chemistry to their peers in finance, marketing, procurement, or human resources. One of the things that we recommend through this report is to use these 8 themes, these 8 research themes related to risk and opportunity as a way to translate the benefits and the value and the business case for safer chemistry within businesses and organizations. As a final note, we did identify a few data gaps within the research that we reviewed. There's an extensive list within the appendix of the report, but in particular, the 2 items that we highlighted as high priorities were to conduct market research around job growth as well as revenue opportunities. Joel and David, that's all we had planned for our presentation today, and I'll turn it back over to you for moderation of questions by the audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Libby. I think I can be heard now.
Yes.
So Libby and Steve, that was a great presentation, great overview. Clearly, the research that you've undertaken has made it very clear that there is a strong case for safer chemistry, for green chemistry, yet that case is sporadic and situational. I think what's interesting and unique about this report compared to other economic analyses of this space or business analyses is that it draws from not just single sources of data, but a wealth of different data in those various areas of value and risk that you go into detail on. But in addition, it has the value of these industry interviews across the value chain, understanding what are the drivers, what are the economic drivers and benefits and the risks that are there, and how do we adapt that? I think that's one of the key lessons you had, was that you need to adapt that business case or the economic case to your own particular needs. But the other part here is that we need case examples, right? We need more stories to be able to tell about the value of sustainable chemistry, safer chemistry, green chemistry. Another key area that we've seen, and this goes back, is that we need to catalyze the transformational power of green chemistry and not just have it as a situational response to key drivers. That's a lot of what we've seen in this research, is that the drivers of demand are there, and in individual cases where the demand drivers drive change, there is an economic case for that change, but it's very driven by demand rather than the supply. I think that's a key lesson here, is that this data, or these data, are very important to making the case for investment in supply of green chemistry solutions. As you were saying, the capital investments that are needed and quite costly and long-term. It takes a lot of money and investment in capital expenditures to transition, but those, from the data, it seems that those expenditures do pay off. But I think what it is a call for is greater capital investment and public investment in green chemistry. The investment at the federal level in green chemistry has been minimal at best. There is a bill that Senator Coons from Delaware and other bipartisan bill that's been introduced called the Sustainable Chemistry Research and Development Act that both ASBC and GC3 have supported and lended their support to, which would establish a committee and framework for accelerating sustainable chemistry research, development, adoption, partnerships, collaborations at the federal level. And it's clear that this report buttresses the argument for such investment to occur. Lastly, I think the important part here is we need better metrics. We need better economic measures, job measures, ways to think about, how we define progress and how we measure, the value of sustainable chemistry or green chemistry, safer chemistry. Lastly, what these trends say is this is the trend, right? This is where the directionality is happening, and we're only going to see more of these drivers, more of this increase in transparency and demand from the value chain for safer chemistry. And this is where the need for those investments, given the time from research to development to adoption to scale, the time is now to be starting to make those investments. So great overview, great set of information that hopefully will engage this debate about the need for safer chemicals even further than it has been over the last few years. So David, with that,
yes.
Let me see if you have any comments you want to make.
Right. So again, just to quickly add on. So right after this, Marvin will present to you sort of the ways to ask questions. So those of you not familiar with the system, and so we will be opening this up shortly. All I would add is that in addition to what Joel had said, we think that there's a crucial opportunity not only for individual businesses, but for obviously full sectors to be working in collaboration with each other to drive this. And of course then the important work of businesses working with the NGO community, businesses working with legislators and the like in order to drive this work at a more systems-wide level. So, for us looking at sort of how to use this important data, in conversation with government in order to advance policy, to advance safer chemistry is really crucial. Just as a small note, ASBC had formed the initiative Companies for Safer Chemicals, which is a campaign representing thousands of businesses seeking to engage on the legislative level so that we can clearly identify chemicals that are unsafe, take harmful chemicals off the market, and most importantly as well, provide incentives for producing safer chemicals and products. So, and promoting transparency throughout the chain. So for us, bringing this message back, not only to our businesses and through our business organizations, and certainly ASBC and GC3 want to work with all of you to continue to get this work to move it forward and to build stronger and stronger economic and business cases. But the other piece of it is, we invite any of you that want to join with us in the Companies for Safer Chemicals initiative. We're actually going to be taking some of this information and other parts of the business case on June 18th to Capitol Hill. Since there is this crucial opportunity here now to continue to influence the conversation about the reform of TSCA, we think this is really important. So for folks that want to engage with us on that, that is an opportunity to be able to tell your story, whether it's just about how you're moving on green chemistry and safer chemistry, or this larger need to have the right type of policy to support good business development in this direction. So Marvin, I'll turn it to you right now in order to lead folks through the questions.
Okay, well, there are some folks who already have questions posed in the chat box, so we'll be getting to you. But for those who don't know how, you can simply type your question in the chat box, or you can simply raise your hand, and I'll be able to unmute you, and you can pose your question to the respective person. The best way to do this, I guess, is I'll go ahead and let Jonathan Riven, who has posed the question. You should be unmuted now. Jonathan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So, Jonathan, you may be able to pose your question now.
Sure. I was just wondering how, safer chemistry products are defined. It's a very ambiguous term, and so when you were looking at markets, what criteria were used for this safer chemistry products?
Steve, do you want to take that one? And I can add on that.
Sure. So safer chemistry products we're looking at ingredients that were being replaced, certain circumstances that were known within an industry to be of concern, so for example, flame retardants, or they were something that would be possibly defined by a company, and obviously that's, you know, in some cases that it is better defined than others. But looking at the kind of the way that we were approaching the data and the analysis here, we were using information that was readily available. So in many circumstances, we cannot go down to the level of specific ingredients, but in some cases, so for personal care, those being defined by the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics or another group such as that, it was readily available. We could understand what kind of ingredient changes were being made. Libby, did you want to add to that?
Well, the only thing I would like to add is that it's a great question, and it speaks to what Joel mentioned about the need for harmonized and aligned metrics, and that we recognize it was a challenge. There is no one definition that was used across all studies that we looked at for safer chemistry. And so since this, in many cases, was a meta-study, we were synthesizing information using a variety of definitions. And we do think that it's important to raise, and it's also something that Joel mentioned could be a benefit in the future, is having a better defined metric that would actually speak to a way to measure safer chemistry across the value chain and also market growth in safer chemistry.
Okay, so the next question is from Rob. And Rob, you should be able to speak right now. Rob Ledier? Okay, we'll move on to the next person then. Okay, Dana Pearls, you should be able to pose your question right now. Dana?
Yeah, hi.
There you are.
Hi, thank you. So my question is related also to this definition of synthetic biology, or this question of green chemistry and what was included in the calculations. There's a lot of debate about whether the techniques known as synthetic biology are included in safe and green chemistry, and certainly that is a rapidly expanding market, although some would argue that it's far from safe, and with a precautionary approach, there's actually no data supporting its safety. And so I'm wondering if synthetic biology techniques were included in this report's exploration of safe chemistry.
Do you want me, this is Joel. Let me add in a little bit about some of the definitional issues. I think one of the challenges here, and we've had this challenge in other assessments we've done looking at the economic case for safer chemistry, is that chemicals permeate the entire economy. All right, the whole value chain, as this report showed. There's no single industrial code for specific types of chemistry, so to get down to that level of discerning synthetic biology or this transformational reaction or that transformational reaction would be an extremely difficult, if not impossible, task. Certainly one of the key issues that came up in the report is this issue of the scope of green chemistry or safer chemistry, and there's a lot of discussion going on about that, which is why we left it purposely a little broad and a little vague, understanding that there are parts of this that some people may not say, well, that's not really green chemistry or safer chemistry, but looking at the whole of the argument, it shows that progression towards the economic benefit. We're never going to get perfection here. It's impossible given how chemicals are so integral to the economy.
So were these calculations including chemicals made using synthetic biology techniques?
because there's no way to know which chemicals are made using synthetic biology techniques, you can't really say that they're in or they're out, or genetic modification. So you make educated guess. That's what economics analysis is really about, is educated guesses.
Thanks. Another way to look at it, this is Steve at Trucost, is that we try to, as much as possible, as Libby mentioned, look at chemistry that was preferred from a human health and environmental perspective, from a safety perspective. A broad definition of green chemistry does include a range of definitions, a range of, some could be around energy efficiency efforts, some could be looking at how things are sourced, whether they're bio-based. We tried to keep things towards the safer chemistry side, so we did not, as Joel's relating, we did not necessarily look at the origin of those materials, but the materials that were identified to be safer for human health and the environment.
Thank you.
Okay, so Rob typed in his question. He said, showing only percentages of projected market growth for safer chemicals show a much rosier picture than it would be by showing safe chemical quantities as a percentage of overall chemical quantities. It's a lot easier to show 2,000% growth when only 100 tons are currently used compared to 2 million tons. What are the quantities associated with these percentages? How strong a story is the increase in demand for safer chemicals?
Thanks. Oh, go ahead, please.
I'll start, and then you can add in, Steve. I think it's a great point that's being made, and it's related to the way we described our overall findings, is that safer chemistry, the market, and the economic case, there's potential and great promise, and it's poised for takeoff. And I think what the person who's asked the question is recognizing is that we're dealing with a starting point of a very small market base. So a small increase can suggest that there's a large percentage change, the small denominator effect, so to speak. So we fully agree that we would have liked to have better data that showed precise quantities, but in some cases, and actually most cases, because this was a meta study using published data by others, we didn't have control over how other people reported their data. So we were limited in some ways in what we could pull together, and most of the information was presented in this kind of format. Steve, are you able to add to that?
Yes, Libby, thanks. It is a great question. It is a sign of the opportunity for growth that can occur, and how, yes, we're dealing with a smaller amount starting for safer chemistry, so inherently there is more opportunity for growth. But I'd compare it to looking at renewable energy, and obviously that marketplace is going through significant growth in the last 5 or 10 years. It started out as a much smaller portion of the overall energy grid, but is pulling a lot of investment now, providing a lot of economic returns, and those are only possible because of the significant growth that is happening. So I'd make that comparison and show that there is this opportunity for increase no matter the original size of the market.
Okay, that is the last question, and we're reaching the top of the hour. So if there are no other questions.
Well, great. So why don't we then, we'll give it a sec. Anyone else?
No one else.
All right, perfect timing. Everyone's cooperating for the top of the hour changeover. So really, on behalf of the American Sustainable Business Council, Green Chemistry and Commerce Council, and Trucost, we want to thank you again for taking the time today to join us for the presentation of this new report. As was mentioned at the top of the call, the full report is available on all three organizations' websites. So we encourage you to download that report and to pass it along as much as possible. And as was mentioned, we want to really continue to work with you all really to go deeper on this, to do the next levels of the sort of economic and business work that needs to be done in order to help us drive on safer chemistry and the like, and just in general offer up our organizations as ones that are truly committed to advancing this work, you know, both for individual businesses in the larger marketplace as well as in policy. So, so with that, we really thank you all and look forward to the ongoing work together. So we'll call it a wrap then. Thank you all.
All right, bye.